on contention. So I've done some episodes on my past podcast, the Parenting Coach podcast, about sibling rivalry and contention and what to do about it. So I've shared a little bit about this, but I want to share a little bit more about my story. Back in the day, years ago, it felt like my kids were fighting all of the time, like just everything at the drop of the hat was a fight, and it was big and it would last for hours sometimes. And it just felt like I lived in this constant tumultuous feeling. Even if we weren't fighting all of the time, it's definitely what my story was. The story in my mind was that we argued a lot and that we didn't get along. And as I was doing this work, this healing work, and I never did it in order to get rid of contention or fighting in my home, but over time, I had done this healing work and I was feeling a lot better, and I started coaching and I was helping other families with this. And one of the things that somebody asked was, what's the biggest thing that you've noticed? Like for you, what has changed the most in your life? And so I was out for a walk and I was like pondering on this question, what would that be for me? In fact, I was listening to somebody else's episode where they were sharing what changes had happened for them. And the first thing that came to mind was fighting. I was like, there's pretty much no fighting in my home anymore. And like any small amounts of fighting or contention just fizzle it out super quickly. And it was in that moment that I was going for that walk, it was probably 2 or 2.5 years ago, that it really struck me how different things had gotten in that area specifically, like drastically different. For sure, the biggest shift that I thought of at that time. Now, as we were traveling the world, one of my friends was talking a little about kids fighting, and she knew that I was a parenting coach, so she asked me a little bit about that. And I said, she asked what to do about fighting, or she asked something about fighting in our home specifically. And I said, my kids just don't really fight anymore. And she actually paused. We were walking along the street. I remember this. We were down in this big city and she was just like, wait, what? She stopped me in the middle of the sidewalk and her mouth was open and she was like, what do you mean your kids just don't really fight anymore? She's, wait a second. We need to talk more about this. And it had never really occurred to me how different this was and how probably unique it was until recently. I was in a conversation talking to a lot of people about their kids arguing, and how every single person had the same kind of a story, that was one of the things that was the bane of their existence. They hated how much their kids fought. They were like, I guess we can't do anything about this. It's always going to be here. And I don't say this shift and change that happened to toot my own horn and be like, look how amazing it is. In fact, I actually think that it happened because I stopped focusing on trying to make it change. When I was so focused on, this is the problem, my kids need to change, my kids need to stop fighting, and I was putting so much attention and effort there, I actually think it created more division in my mind. And therefore I focused more on the fighting, but I also think I threw my own negative energy into the ring and added more to the fighting that was already happening. It's like the fighting's going back and forth and they're throwing this negative energy back and forth. And then I come in and I'm like, here's some more. Let's see if somehow this dissipates it. So I don't say it to be like, I am the best. That's absolutely not how I'm saying it. It's that I think that I was looking in the wrong space. I think that I was looking at, my kids need to change. I need to figure out this fighting thing. What can I do to try and help my kids stop fighting? And it stopped me from looking inward. It kept the problem outside of myself instead of me looking inward at, what do I have power in? Where does my power lie? And what can I do to shift things? And that is actually what has shifted things the most. So I got home from this one conversation I was having with people about arguing and kids and parenting and whatever. And I kind of secretly recorded my kids because I wanted to see their response. And I was like, hey guys, what do you think about fighting in our home? Do you think that we fight a lot? And everybody was like, nope, not really. Pretty much not at all. It just doesn't seem to be a thing. And I was like, okay, what about 5 years ago? 5 years ago, I even mentioned, this is where we were living. This is what our house was like. Tell me about fighting in our home then. And everybody started talking about all these crazy fighting experiences that they remember and how big they were and how much we fought and all of the things. And then I paused and was like, okay, so what do you think changed? And they all just stopped and were like, I don't know. A couple of them were like, I don't know, I guess things don't bother me as much, or maybe I don't hold a grudge as much, or they had a couple little ideas, but pretty much they were stumped. And I was like, I know what changed. What changed was me and my own inner healing. And they were like, way to take credit for it. But I was like, no, really. I didn't put them in therapy. I didn't put them in all these crazy, programs. I didn't do things to change them that would change their behavior. What I did was I turned inwards and I noticed my own behavior. That is the only thing that changed. There's this quote from Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. And I like to say, be the change you want to see in your marriage or in your family or in your home or in your community. And what I don't think I recognized before is that everything was outside of me. Everything was everything out here is a problem, instead of turning inwards to see what might be a problem within me, what is happening within me. So my own inner healing journey is what changed the energy within our home. And therefore, fighting shifted. I think of it now as like an energetic thermostat. We're all energetic thermostats. In fact, I just heard somebody the other day say, like, she was sitting in a room and there was this one person that was kind of the bane of her existence, and she just could feel all of this negative energy when she was around this person. And she even had her back turned, and they like walked behind, and she didn't even know they entered the room, but she could feel the energy shift as they entered the room. And I think that our energy influences other people's energy, especially if you're really open to other people's emotions, or you can kind of like think their thoughts or whatever, but you kind of know what they're saying, you kind of know what they're feeling. If I'm really, really, really angry and I go into a situation with my kids, and before I got in, they were all really calm, even if I don't yell at them, even if I don't tell them how angry I am, they can feel it. I've asked them before. They can definitely feel it. They can feel it in my tone, in my body language, in my behavior. If energy doesn't resonate with you, think of body language, think of behavior, think of how that shifts as your emotions are shifting, as your feelings shift. So we all have influence there. So I think of it as like, I changed the thermostat in my home. I was able to change the energetic thermostat by turning inwards and recognizing what was my part, what was my role, what was I bringing to the table. And I decided to become that change first. And again, I actually didn't even think about fighting. I put that off. There was so many other things I wanted to work on in regards to myself and my relationships and my parenting that actually became my focus. And my focus was much more inward. And it was surprising to me that several years after this work, when I recognized that was the biggest shift, that it had come without my awareness, without my attention to it. It had come anyways as a byproduct of this work. I will also offer, there's no guarantee that if you do your own inner healing, that all of a sudden your kids are just going to be lovely, kind humans that never argue again, right? I'm not saying that we don't have disagreements. We don't just miraculously think all of the same thoughts all the time. We still have grumpy days. We still get irritable. We are still human. So there's no guarantee that it will be what your mind wants it to be in the future. That's not why I did it. I didn't do it so that I could miraculously change my kids' behavior or get them to be different people. I stopped trying to change them and I focused on changing me inside. And that's what changed. The other thing I'll say is that even though there is no guarantee, it's absolutely the best success rate. So if you want something to change, this is the way to do it. It's not to try and stop your kids from fighting and say the perfect thing or have all these conversations with your families and sit down talks about what am I going to do and what are you going to do and how we're going to change that. I tried that for years. None of it ever changed long-term or sustainably, maybe for a day or two, maybe even for a week, but never permanently. So I'm going to offer that the best success rate that you have is for you to recognize your own energetic thermostat and to be doing your own work and notice how the shifts just naturally happen. And the last thing that I'll mention is that even if those arguments are still happening, they won't bother you as much. It won't feel so in your face. It won't feel like this urgent problem that you have to solve. So even if there is still some arguing happening in your home, it will just feel so chill. It just won't bother you. You won't attach meaning to it about yourself. And so it therefore won't feel so heavy. In fact, one of the reasons why I came home and decided to secretly record my kids and ask their answer, because I was so curious what they were going to say, was because I wondered to myself, is it just me that thinks that fighting has changed in my home? Because I knew that I wasn't focusing on it, so it didn't bother me. And I was like, I could just be living in this little bubble and not even noticing. And like my kids could still be fighting. I don't even know. So I wanted to hear their perspective on that. And I do think that all of these things are true. I think that my perspective and focus, my perspective shifted. And therefore, I didn't notice it as much and it didn't become such a problem. But I also think that the bigger thing was my own energy and my own work that I did. It's like how when people come to me and they're like, how do I convince somebody in my life to go to therapy? Or how do I convince somebody in my life to go to coaching? This is actually the question I get almost the most, is not like, what can I do? But what can I do to help this other person that's not me? And I always say, you do the work first. If you want somebody to go to therapy, you go to therapy. If you want somebody to go to coaching, you go to coaching. If you want somebody to do the self-healing work, you do the self-healing work. Because our influence is what influences others. And I think there is a correlation between dropping control and expectations and trying to change other people, and therefore our influence increasing. Like in the same, like they're inversely correlated. And I think that's really what was able to happen in my home. That's like the secret to our fighting contention success, is stop seeing it like the big problem that it feels like as if it is, and focus on my inner power and what's happening for me and my own healing. And as I was explaining this to someone the other day, they were like, then everybody needs this work. And I was like, everybody does need this work. Not everybody has to come to me for this work. There's amazing therapists, there's amazing counselors, there's amazing books that can help you through and podcasts that can help you through, but it's finding something that is for you. And one of my mantras is, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. I don't even know where that came from. I think it was a Chinese proverb, but I love that concept of what is meant for me is going to come for me right now. And so just leave yourself open to, what is that healing for me? Where do I start? And let the answers come. All right. Thank you so much. And again, just a quick little shout out to remember to follow, subscribe, comment, share, all of those things so we can get this message out in the world. And thanks for being here, the Art of Shame-Free Living podcast. If you are enjoying these episodes, I would love for you to follow, subscribe, like, share, do all those things so that it can get more out into the world, more out into the algorithm, and join me in this shame-free movement.